Mhm. Okay, welcome. Seventh Agile Humans Day, Jim and Tony. The floor is yours. You can start.
Thank you
Well,
so
thank
much.
you.
My
Okay, so we'll just kind of dive right in. There's a lot to talk about. So, 20 some years ago or ish, 20-ish years ago, we started working with all of this stuff, Kanban, personal Kanban, lean, agile, etc. And working to build ways that people felt more connected to their work, more connected to each other, and that people had the ability to, as we like to say, act with confidence. So Tony and I have been doing this for quite some time. Look at that. It's really, truly in Serbian, as is our names, which we don't see very often. So on a daily basis, Tony and I very rarely see our names translated into other languages. So very quickly, yeah. So we've done these things. We've built the Kanban world and expanded how lean is thought about and work and those things. But for us, the major thing is, do people, when they go to work, do they feel better about the work that they're doing? Do they feel good about each other? And that's it's been a journey. We use the word journey a lot in Agile, especially. But what it basically means is that we never start out actually knowing what our destination is going to be, where we're going. And my personal background started off as angry punk rocker in the 70s and 80s, and then as an urban planner and a transportation engineer. I was an AIDS activist. And I've done a lot of things that have been aimed at, can we make a better world than we have right now? And the answer today is, unfortunately, more than ever, yes, the world could be better than it is right now. And so it's our responsibility as people to figure out all sorts of different ways to make the world a better place, a place where people feel more comfortable, where they go to sleep at night, being able to sleep at night. And that's kind of what we're all about. So I'm going to hand it over to Tony, who is going to talk about this slide, the Our Story slide,
All right. So
and herself, of course.
I wanted to frame this as a conversation, and I wanted to talk about two faded stories in my life that was around my journey, shall we say, with personal Kanban. So, about 16 years ago, I got a call from a friend who had a friend who was writing this book on this new phenomenon that was taking over the internet. This thing called social media. And he was looking for some insights from history. And at that time, I had been working in Washington, D.C. as a public historian, crafting stories outside of academia with monuments, memorials, museums, taking history out of academia and bringing it to the public. And so he wanted to incorporate some examples for history into this book on social media. So we'd never met before. He lived 2,700 miles away from me. So each morning we'd do three things. We would jump on Skype. We'd pull up a Google Draw image that he created of this thing with writing on it that I'm being intentionally ambiguous right now, with all the writing that we had to do, with all the writing that had already been done, and all the writing that we were going to do for the day. And then we would open a shared Google Doc and we would just synchronously write. I would actually see him in the document writing, and I would maybe correct something that he would write, he would correct something that I would write. And then one day we were doing this and the gentleman asked, "Don't you have to make dinner?" And I was like, "But didn't I just have breakfast?" And I looked at the time and something like 10 hours had passed and neither of us had noticed. And if you haven't guessed that by now, that gentleman is none other than my co-author and my co-host here, Jim Benson. And the state that we found that we were in, if you want to switch to the image with the gentleman who was one of our idols, Jim, is that we were in a state of what Hungarian American psychologist who pioneered research on happiness and creativity, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, We were in the state that he describes as a flow state. We were completely involved in the activity that we were engaged in for its own sake. Our ego completely fell away. Time flew. Every action, every moment, every thought followed another one. We weren't distracted. We were so engaged with the work. And it's because we were using this thing called, that we didn't know what it was really at the time or what it was doing, is we were using a Kanban. And so we started to figure out, what exactly was happening. So we looked at, and I'm not going to get into the rules yet. I'm going to let Jim get into the rules, but we were looking at some of the elements that we were dealing with at this point. So we were visually organizing our work, which was giving us this clear representation of what was in our heads, right? So Jim had in his mind everything that he had already done, everything that he wanted to do. He was just starting to work with me. We had to normalize expectations, and they were all in his head. So everything that he had in his head, he externalized on this board. We're also limiting the amount of work that we were doing at any given time, which prevented us from context switching, and it helped us maintain focus. It likewise created this sense of progress in our tasks. We were actually able to see work getting done in real time. And it was work that was broken into manageable chunks. And what was happening as we were going through this process, mind you, I had never met Jim up until this point. He was in Seattle, I was in DC, is we were developing psychological safety. All right. We were getting to the point where he was able to see I was becoming more comfortable being vulnerable because I was writing essentially in a fishbowl, right? I was able to make mistakes in real time. There were no repercussions to those mistakes other than the fact that, we would both figure out problems in real time. And what it was also doing is it was giving us this balance between our individual skill set, and it was also causing us to reach a little further. And that's another element of flow. So we recognized that we had this structured system, but it was really kind of flexible. And so one of the first lessons that we noticed with Personal Kanban is that it really did align with some of the traits that Csikszentmihalyi has mapped out with flow. And we're going to continue on with the psychology of Personal Kanban in a few minutes. But first, I want Jim to talk to you all a little bit about, what's a quick overview of Personal Kanban look like? How could you all get started with it right now?
Yeah, how does this thing actually work? So zoom around here in the Mirosphere. So all of us have a lot of expectations, and not expectations that we have on other people, but expectations that other people have on us. Other people that we work with, our spouses, our families. There's just a lot of things that we're expected to do. And the more that those things are not written down, the more likely it is that those expectations are things that you will forget about and then not get done. So then when you go to prioritize your work and think about what you should do next, when you're not visualizing your work at all, then you have to go in and you have to figure out inside your head, what is it that I should do next? Who is it for? Who's important? Who's less important? What work is important? What work isn't important? Who's going to be mad at me? All those types of things. And so those live kind of in this big jumble in your head, just like this big jumble here. And so what happened for us is that at Gray Hill Solutions, my software company, we were doing Agile and we were doing daily stand-ups. And we would get into the stand-up and people would say what they were working on today and what they'd worked on yesterday and whether they had any blockers, which is a terrible way to run any of these meetings, just saying. And the reason is because it's just people talking and they can say whatever they want. So at one point I said to my developers, of which it wasn't huge. I didn't have a team of 30. This was a team of 8 people. And I said, the thing you said you're going to do yesterday, did you finish it? Well, no, I couldn't finish it because I'm waiting for this. So I'm working on this thing today. All right. Well, how about the thing you said you were working on the day before yesterday? Well, I didn't finish that because we're waiting for this UAT. Well, how about the thing you said you were working on the day before that? Well, I haven't finished that because of blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, well, how about the day before that? And they're like, shut up. And so we said, look, let's just like right now on the whiteboard, just write down everything that everyone has that's not done yet. And they're like, well, it's already in Bugzilla. And it's like, not to date myself, but it's already in Bugzilla. It's like no, let's write it down so that we can see it. We filled up the whole whiteboard full of crap that wasn't done yet. I'm like, oh crap, this is terrible. So we said, all right, so how about we do this? Let's treat this whiteboard as all the things that still need to get done. Not even the backlog, but just the stuff that needs to get done. And then on this other whiteboard next to it, we're just going to write down one thing a day and finish it and see how much farther we get. And everybody's like, well, we can't do that because there's like months of stuff just on this board. And we're like, yeah. So they started to do that. And then when that happened, they immediately started to focus on that work and finish it. So in Personal Kanban, we want to take all of this stuff out of this huge backlog of fear and pain, and we want to just write it down on Post-it notes and put it into a backlog. You all know this because you're all here. You came here for a reason, but nonetheless, you're going to hear it from the guy. You're going to hear it from me. So we do this. We write all the things down and we put it in here. And so now what's happened is we've taken this big jumble and we've turned it into a rectangle. Your brain can actually process this. These things now have a spatial relationship. They have an importance relationship. They have human relationships. There's a lot of different things that before we had to close our eyes really tight and think about all of these things individually, as opposed to just looking at this now and saying, you know what, these two are the priority. I'm going to do these two today, and then I'm going to see what comes next. So then we calmed the backlog. And then, as you all know, big part of Kanban and Personal Kanban is limiting your work in progress. So the reason that you're doing that is that now before the work in progress was this, right? This sucks. This is a very bad thing. And this is literally every Scrum team I've ever worked with. They're like, oh, no, we're doing 2-week iterations. It's like you're still overloading yourself. So now you've got your backlog, you've got the stuff that you're focusing on, and then you focus and finish and focus and finish. And then you pull things in. And now, because you can only have 3 things that you're working on and not an infinite number of things, when this gets finished, you have to pull the most important thing from over here. You can't just start it because somebody's complaining about it. So now you can pull the most important thing in. Things are now very intentional. From a boss perspective, the boss used to show up and say, do this. And you'd be like, holy crap, look at that. But now the boss can show up and say, oh, you know what? Here, let me move this over. I see what you're already working on. This stuff's important. I see this stuff's in your backlog. This thing that I'm pulling in, it's just another thing. So you can just get to it when you can. Or this thing is super important. So just make sure that you get to it fairly soon. Or this thing is a super, super, super emergency. So you can now break your WIP limit and do it because we know why you're breaking your WIP limit. That's the sum total of this entire system is just, can you see what's expected of you? Can you select work in a way that's thoughtful and then focus on it so that you're completing it with quality and communicating back to everybody else? These are the things that are in flight. So once we started doing that with our software development teams, all of a sudden we had people. So as before, it was like, when do we pair? When do we pair? I don't know if we should pair about this. Well, it suddenly became really obvious. So like somebody pulled this in and it involved this certain part of a schema. And you're like, hey, I wrote that part of the schema. We should pair. Because the work made it obvious when you should pair. Or you pull this in and somebody says, you know what? I don't know anything about that. Can I watch over your shoulder so that I can upskill? So those things that are so hard for us to do become very easy when the team itself sees who's doing what and when. So that is the Kanban 101-iest Kanban that I can give. I'm just going to very quickly go through a couple of design patterns, if it's okay with you, Tony, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
hand it over for you to
Yeah, no,
go.
that's perfect. I'm
go.
gonna let you handle the Miro board anyway. So all good.
Okay. So I'm just going to pull this over. Go, if life is moving stuff. So this is a priority filter. And people have a hard time prioritizing. And when they do, they tend to do this stupid thing where they're like, this is the most important thing. This is the second most important thing. This is the third most important thing. This is the fourth most important thing. And then what ends up happening is none of these things are really that much more or less important than the others in general. And so then you end up just having these really long meetings where whoever wanted this done yells that this is the most important thing. And whoever wanted this done yells that that's the most important thing. And then you just get into this long, pointless political battle where people are trying to prioritize things. So with the priority filter, what we do is we say, look, you've only got a certain amount of space here. What are our P1s? Oh, look, we're out of space. What are our P2s? And then after 6 of these, oh, look, you're out of space. And then you have a bunch of room for P3s. And then when you're done with something, you go over here and you interrogate the backlog. We'll just grab a bunch of these and move them over just so that there's something down here. You go over here and you interrogate this backlog, right? You say, what can I do next? And in the stack ranking world, you would just grab this and then I'd start it and start working on it. And then I'd need something from Tonianne, and she wouldn't be around for 2 days. And so it would just sit there in flight, right? So now what happens is you look over here into the priority filter and you say, okay, can I do this one? No, because Tonianne's not here. Can I do this one? No, because we're about to buy a new tool and it's going to change how it's done. Can I do this one? No, not quite yet, because I need to collaborate with this other team and the other team has another deliverable. Then we can't get that out today. Can I do this one? Yes. And then I will get that done. So the priority filter isn't stack ranking, it's an interrogation, a good use of the word interrogation, of your backlog, so that you can say, can I finish? Can I finish? Can I finish? Yes. And then you do the thing that you can focus on and finish. So you're always making progress until the high priority things can actually be complete. Because you going off and finishing half of something and then letting it sit for a couple of days we've all been there. Then you just have to go back and remember what you did and fight with people and whatnot. So that is a priority filter, and that is a design pattern. And so we have a lot of, like, hundreds of design patterns. And
We're gonna give you the simplest ones to get started today. And
exactly.
so
And so there's
while in the chat, I wrote that there are only 2 rules to personal Kanban:
yep,
visualize your work and limit your work in process. You are not going to benefit from any of the things that we're talking about today if you omit one of those rules. Those are
yep,
absolute necessary.
yep,
But the design patterns that we are showing you are other ways that you can pull value from your Kanban. And
right.
the design filter, the priority filter that Jim is using is, in fact, a visualization that I have used pretty much in every single Kanban I've ever built. So it's an
Yeah,
important one. That's why we're introducing this to you. That's why.
yeah. And so the other thing that's important here is that ready, doing, done is usually a terrible way to have a Kanban. It's a good way to start.
And we'll
But the
explain
first,
why. Yeah.
yeah, but the first thing that you're looking for from your board is it giving me the information that I need to act?
Yeah.
And so what we find is that we generally want to know what we're doing. We want to know what's on hold. We want to know that when something has changed or that we've learned something, that we've told the other people about it. We want to know that when we've learned something and it changes how we work every day, that we will take that ticket at the end, and instead of just moving it to done, which is like done, we will move it over here and say done and learned something. And now we have to get together as a group and say our work as a group has changed because of what we learned during this task, right? So this means that we stop having, we might not stop having retrospectives, but we don't wait till the retrospective to improve. We actually do what Agile is supposed to do from the beginning, which is constantly and continuously inspect and adapt. So
I can actually give you a quick story about that.
Okay.
I color code all of my tickets. And at one point, my colors for my client work were red, and my colors for an event that we were holding called Kaizen Camp were green. And what I noticed at the end of each week, all of my green tickets were winding up in the done column for Kaizen Camp, and all of my red tickets, our paid work, was still either bottlenecked or stuck in the backlog. Without visualizing that issue, I had nothing to stand on when I complained to Jim. But looking at the board together, noticing that, oh my goodness, we had all these green tickets, all these Kaizen Camp tickets were getting done, and paid work was being bottlenecked, we were able to have a conversation such that we realized we had bitten off more than we had bitten off more than we could chew with these events, that we were becoming an event planning company. And we were immediately right there and then recognized we were actually over capacity. We canceled 3 events based upon the information, the knowledge that our personal Kanban surfaced. And again, in the absence of the visualization, if I were to just go to Jim and complain, what is that? That's just an emotional response. Now I was able to visualize the problem that we were faced with. Right. So, but Jim, are you good with this part? You're muted. Muted? Are you muted?
I was just about to go up here and show a couple of
Okay,
Kanbans
go for
in the
it.
wild and then hand it
Go
over
for
to
it.
you.
Yeah.
All right. So these are 2 Kanbans for the same project. This is both for a construction project in New York.
Can you please talk about the fact that we use the term personal Kanban and that says team, and are you able to use personal Kanban with a team?
Yeah, all of these are personal Kanban being used with a team.
Okay.
And
the way that
yep.
with the name personal Kanban, it does not mean that you cannot use it with a team, with your family. What
Yeah.
we're differentiating between is manufacturing Kanban. So, Kanban that will actually be creating a car or something like that, the Kanban that moves along the assembly line with the tickets, we're just distinguishing between it as, from manufacturing, right? So it has nothing to do with it's just for one. That's not the case.
So in this case, there are 2 different things that are being tracked in a Kanban. This one is the group. This entire group here is using this one board to show each other what their demands are in the upcoming week. So each of these people whose backs are turned to you is a superintendent for a different part of this large construction project. And so they can be structural steel and concrete and the external panels that go on the building and electric and HVAC. All of those things would have their own manager. Each one of these people is one of those managers, and they need to work together throughout the course of the week. And what they can see here on, this is probably Friday of the week before, what they can see here is that next week, as the work is coming up, if they need to work with other people, they better do it on Monday or Tuesday, because everybody is going to be in meetings or out of the office on Wednesday for doing different things, right? So what they're seeing now is, how can I collaborate with my teammates to get work done in the upcoming week? And this is totally a Kanban. Work is flowing through this. Each one of these stickies relates to a certain piece of work. So let's just say that blue is for Dave Barron here. And this is what Dave Barron's going to be working on Wednesday. And Chris over here says, oh, wow, you know what? Dave Barron is going to be working with the client or with the customer on these 2 tickets, and I have some interest in that. I should talk to him on Monday or Tuesday so he's fully informed before he goes into that meeting. Or when he's in that meeting, he can gather this information from me, or I can ask to go to that meeting, or whatever that might look like. But they see what's coming up as a group, right? Then over here, this is a different Kanban for the procurement process, actually for the Columbia Business School, but we use the exact same board for this project. And procurement is basically when there's a $1 billion project, somebody has to go out and buy everything from the toilet paper rolls all the way up to the steel framing of the building. And that's a lot of money that needs to be spent in a very short period of time. So this is a very long personal Kanban. It goes way past the end of this picture. It was a 27-step Kanban of all of the steps taken for something to go from an initial request for proposals all the way through to a purchase product. And again, that is everything from as trivial as rolls of toilet paper all the way up to something as important as the windows or the concrete of the building. So all of these things have a variety of stakeholders. They have their own individual problems that they can run into. So you can see a lot of them are marked red. That means that they have some sort of issue. There's a lot of issues that flow. And so before we started tracking it this way, they were literally tracked in a spreadsheet that looked like this, which is just basically a huge block of unrecognizable data. This was actually something that they could use to communicate, just like this is. So don't get stuck in thinking that a Kanban looks like this thing, because a Kanban can look like almost anything as long as it's just telling you the stories that you want for your work.
And so long as it reflects those tool rules, visualizing your work, limiting your work in progress. So before I suggested that there were 2 fated days in my journey with personal Kanban, and the second one happened not long after we landed our first gig in Washington D.C. with the World Bank. They were one of the first ones to bring us in to do a personal Kanban training. When he got to DC, we started to write and blog about the system that we had been using to pack up his office, to move to Seattle. And we thought we'd hear from, well, we thought that we would hear from, software developers. And instead we started hearing from like really strange people, like moms and teachers and homeschoolers and people working on film sets and people who are putting together their weddings. And we're like, what the heck is happening? Why is this resonating with so many people? Why is this, why is something ostensibly from manufacturing and then from that we took to software development resonating with so many people? And so we spoke with a couple of social psychologists, and they explained to us that it was because, Jim, you want to pull that ticket?
To this?
The next one, no, the reason that this worked for everybody. So the reason that it worked for everybody is right underneath the hipster dude, is because as they explained to us, personal Kanban follows the story arc, the universal way of telling a story in any culture through any era. So you have your birth, your options, you have your conflict, which is when you're doing your work, and then your resolution, which is your completion. And so we're like, maybe this isn't just sticky notes on a whiteboard afterwards. So then, I spoke about this fated day. And so not long after we started working together, I was in a massive car accident that left me with a traumatic brain injury. And driven by a desire to first get my speech and my thinking back, I had to learn everything about how to optimize my brain. So I was peppering my therapist with all kinds of questions about how do I optimize my thinking and my focus and my learning. And it was this personal journey into brain science that profoundly shaped so much of what Jim and I have learned over the past 15 years with Kanban. And so this presentation, just like all of our classes, all of our trainings, You're going to hear Jim and I talk a lot about Kanban and Lean, and now we talk a lot about Obeya, but you're going to hear far more from us. And what we care more is that you're focusing less on the form factors, like, okay, you have to have a column over here, you have to column over here, and more on the needs of the individuals that are using these things. Because as knowledge workers, we all employ the same machinery. No matter what vertical you are in, no matter what company, no matter your corporate culture, and that's our brains. And so in focusing not just on the system or the form factor itself, we want people to focus, we want all of you to focus on the human psychology and the cognitive processing that this helps you do, so that we can create work environments that are way more humanistic and mechanistic. So what does that mean with regard to what we were just talking about? Well, Jim, if you don't mind pulling up your board that you were using, your Kanban before, I want to talk a little bit about when Jim was pulling a ticket into done. So scientists have discovered, and there's an article that I could share with you all at the end of it, that completion literally feels good. The article is something like the F word feels good, and that F word is finished. So what happens when we complete something on a Kanban? You're getting your kinesthetic feedback. It feels really good pulling that ticket across, but why? It's because we're also getting the visual feedback, likewise, that we are completing something. And with that, we get a burst of serotonin. It makes us feel good. We likewise get a burst of dopamine. Now, dopamine, you hear, dopamine, the molecule of more. Dopamine is about the pursuit of something that is enjoyable. It's not just the completed thing, but it's the pursuit. Why is that important? Because the more tasks you see and feel that you're finishing in your Kanban, you will not now start optimizing to complete tickets. In the absence of visualizing your completion, we are optimizing for a neural reward that comes with novelty. How many of us have started a project, gotten bored with it, we want something fresh, so we either start another task, and so we have one thing in flight, two things in flight, three things in flight, nothing is getting completed, or worse, we get so bored with what we're doing, we get distracted and we look at something else. And so what happens? We infuse our process with a lot of wasted effort, with extra time, our completion, our deadlines get busted. So we're recognizing that the kinesthetic and the visual feedback gives us a neural reward. Something else that Jim said before, he talked about prioritization with the priority filter. We know that prioritization is among the most cognitively demanding tasks anybody can do. It's because we have to envision a future state. So being able to get these things down on paper and actually take into consideration what our current context is, that is why we use this priority filter. And I will show you what it looks like later on in when we go further into design patterns, what it looks like on my actual Kanban. I actually update my backlog every single day. And so one of the reasons Jim mentioned before, that basic ready, doing, and done that we wrote about in the original Personal Kanban book, one of the reasons we have since changed that first column to options, you're going to notice all through this, we're using the term options for that first column, is because our language begets behavior. And when you say something is to do, people take that as a mandate. We have a story about that. We were in Seattle, Washington. Now, the location is very important. And we were doing something called a boardwalk. We had returned to an organization that we had done consulting with, and we were taking a look at their Kanbans to see how they were they still useful for everybody. And so we were at their retrospective and we were asking them, okay, and somebody was explaining, these are our green tickets and our green tickets represent this, and they go through the value stream like this, and then our blue tickets, and I'm asking why the red tickets are getting, and all of a sudden we noticed that there is a white ticket, the only white ticket on the board in the backlog. And we're like, what is that? And they're like, they're not even talking to the white ticket. And we're like, no, talk to us about that single white ticket. And their response was, what white ticket? We're like, that white ticket. And they said, and there was no writing on this white ticket. Now, remember before I said that this happened in Seattle, Washington? I brought that up because it is always raining in Seattle, Washington in this part of the year. This ticket was sun-bleached in Seattle, Washington. It was originally another color. It had become sun-bleached to the point that there was no writing on it. But because it was in a column that said to do, people were afraid to get rid of that ticket. And there was no
Still
value
needs to
to
be
that
done.
ticket. So the reason that we changed that column to options is because we want you to be intentional about the work that you're doing relative to your current context and the value that you are pulling. If it is December 27th and I have a ticket in my backlog that says, buy mommy a Christmas present, on December 30th, I better be sending her a really big gift because the expiration date on that ticket is already passed. So tickets all have expiration dates, whether it's on the ticket or not. You always want to be scrutinizing when you're prioritizing your tasks. Will this ticket still create some value? All right. So we talk a lot about the psychology of work when it comes to visualization right now. And a lot of that has to do with creating essentially a neural cocktail that our knowledge workers like. And how do we do that? We do that by triggering certain chemicals like dopamine, like serotonin. Another one that we trigger when we're collaborating, and Jim and I, pretty much everything that comes out of Momentous Institute is a collaboration between Jim and I. Well, what does that do for our neural cocktail? We know that collaboration triggers oxytocin. So when you are working in a board with somebody, that triggers the bonding hormone. It triggers trust and it triggers bonding, and it likewise helps with problem solving and decision making. So that's one benefit of Kanban that I have loved. It's that I can look at my colleagues' boards or shared boards, and I could see if they're stuck, and I could immediately jump in and say, hey, let's pair on this and pull this. Years ago, Richard Dawkins wrote about the selfish gene. And then years after that, in the Harvard Business Review, Yochai Benkler wrote a refutation of it called The Unselfish Gene, making the argument that we are genetically predisposed to collaborate. Jim just wrote a beautiful book on this called The Collaboration Equation. Prehistoric man didn't survive because they were lone wolves. They survived because they collaborated, because they existed and hunted and lived and parented in tribes. We need our tribes, especially now when the world is very uncertain. Creating mechanisms where people can collaborate during the course of their day in a way that's easy, in a way that they're not asking people, what do I have to do? So that they get that flow that I talked about before. When I go into work in the morning, I never have to ask what needs to be done because I could see it on my board. When people have no clarity over what they have to do, they can fall prey to something called learned helplessness. Just tell me what to do. And that's not what we are hiring our knowledge workers for. The last thing I wanted to talk about is with regard to this little psych of work section. And we, if you follow us on LinkedIn or on Momentous Institute, we write and talk a lot about the psychology of visual systems, whether it be in Lean, Agile, with Personal Kanban, or Obeya now. We talk a lot about how this triggers people to healthy, humane behaviors. And one of the ways we go back to that priority filter, and we talk about prioritization being the most cognitively demanding task any knowledge worker could do. It has been suggested that should be the first thing you do when you're fresh in the morning. Not to reach for your phone, not to look at your email, not to look at social media. Get your prioritization out of the way when you are freshest, because again, you are envisioning a future state. The other thing I want to talk about is when you are not visualizing your options, that can lead to analysis paralysis and decision fatigue. So one of the benefits of visualizing what you have to do on a Kanban is that it simplifies your decision-making process because you don't have to pull things out of your head. All right, it's all just there for you. So it makes prioritization so much easier without feeling overwhelmed, right? Does anybody have any questions? We're gonna do a major, question dump at the end of this. But is there anything that's high level, super unclear with anybody right now? I just want to make sure that you're all still with us. Okay, good stuff.
I had one. I was just inspired by your board. How do you avoid the trap not to focus on moving quickly your task into done section, but rather focus on the quality of the work? Because what I've seen in different teams, people want to avoid boss, your team getting annoyed by the fact that some cards are still stuck in progress section and they want to move them as quickly as possible. So the quality of your work is coming into question.
Excellent question, because right, you have this gamification element in here, and you want to make sure people aren't just pulling tickets into done to get that neuro reward.
There's one of the things that came up almost immediately since we are an Agile group and mostly everyone here or will be watching this is in software in some way or another. In software, you usually end up with people who have radically different learning styles. And so those radically different learning styles have different optimizations for when people will hyper-focus. So you might hyper-focus on a little part of a task and then ignore almost the rest of it, or you might hyper-focus on the entire task, and both of them lead you to actually never get things done or to finish things without quality. And so for us, the game of Kanban isn't how fast can you, oops, yeah, everyone needs authorization for Jira cards. And it's not how fast can you do this? Because I mean, I can do this right now pretty fast. This is pretty fun. But the question is, like, once something gets into here, the game is now, how quickly can this move over here such that it is in a condition that it won't come back? Okay. So our goal in life, because we have terrible KPIs, is like, what is our throughput? What is our cycle time? What is this? But it's never how many of these stupid cards come back. So we work with a lot of really bad Kanban and Agile teams that say, like, we get all of our work done and we have this horrible technical debt problem. Well, guess what? If you have a horrible technical debt problem, you never got your work done. Because all technical debt is the stuff you didn't do right. Maybe a little bit heavy for this time in the evening, but but that's the thing. So then when we got people to say, all right, look, you super ADHD people and you super Asperger people, when you get this task, your goal is to get it over here such that it is in a state that it won't come back. And that victory condition actually is processed the same regardless of where you are on the learning spectrum. Because you've changed the definition of quality, not to, oh, what's your definition of done, which is always something you can debate about for hours. But just like, if this comes over here, if this ticket is done, will it not come back? And that thing alone was so fascinating to watch teams defect level decrease rapidly because the act of focusing and finishing was important. And so if this thing comes over and this ticket goes completely south on us and it turns into, I have become evil. I am the sticky that hath become evil. When that sticky becomes evil, it now starts to get larger and larger and larger as it sits in this area. And that means that more people should know about the ticket. So if you're worried that upper management is going to become upset because a ticket has been there for a while, it is likely that that ticket and the level of complexity behind it is now a structural issue. This ticket is not going to become hard. It's not going to become huge because coding is hard. So let's say something else that people probably won't like, but coding is really easy. It's super easy to code. Code is just not a hard thing to do. Solving problems, that's hard. And so when we get in here, this stupid problem is probably because we can't talk to one of the other teams and now we have a dependency that we can't solve. It's there because we've made a structural decision in our technical stack or in our data model that means that doing this allegedly simple task is now very difficult because this now assumes a new one-to-many ratio that our data model swears is a one-to-one ratio or vice versa. Like I know that everyone here has seen just that one very simple to describe problem turn into ridiculously expensive to solve tickets, right? So when these things come up, the longer that they dwell here, the more likely it is that you need to actually go get that person that you're worried that's going to be upset and bring them in and say, we have a structural problem that is either going to require a reconfiguration of how we've envisioned this whole solution, or it's going to be a reorg of the organization, or at the very least, we're going to need to work with these people that we normally don't work with. That's a long answer, I know, but I didn't want either Tony or I to under answer it because it's an incredibly deep question that we've spent in all sorts of types of companies, in international government and in banking and construction. These problems come up everywhere. And
So I want to talk about the banking.
Yep, go for it.
Yeah. So there's two other ways we wanted to address that. The first was we actually did this with a major bank in Scotland. They were having a problem with tremendous amount of technical debt and a lot of bugs. And so what we asked the software developers to do when they were done with a piece of work and they were pulling it into done, we asked them a subjective well-being question. How did that piece of work make you feel? Did it make you feel happy? Did you feel professionally satisfied? Put a smiley face on it. Did it upset you? Were you not happy with the quality? Were you not ready? And so at the end of the day, we were able to look at they had a retrospective column after done. So that's another design pattern you could do. You could add a retro column at the end of your Kanban with smiley faces and upset faces. And the more tickets that people self-identify that the work upset them, that's a quality issue right there. Because people who are upset about their actions as a professional are not going to be satisfied with the work that they're doing. And so it's a good opportunity when you have a bunch of tickets with an unhappy face that's showing people are unhappy with the way that work went, then you do not wait for a Kaizen event. You do not wait for your retrospective. Do not wait for tomorrow's huddle. You metaphorically stop the line like they would do at Toyota. You would pull that andon cord. You would stop the line. You would have an emergency huddle and say, why is all of this work making it into the done column where you're not happy doing it? Were you understaffed? Did you not have the resources for it? Were you up against a time constraint that was unrealistic? That is one way to address tickets getting into done that do not maintain the quality or the standard. Another way, and then I'll just end it at this, is to actually have service level agreements above your columns. So some teams will put, in order for a ticket in this column to be complete, it has to satisfy all of this criteria. And in the app that I will show you later, I'm actually able to do that in the app. The ticket will, or the column will have certain agreements that you will not move this ticket unless it satisfies, did you have to get, I don't know, did it need manager's eyes? Did it adhere to GDPR rules? Did it adhere to something else? So you can put those service level agreements above the columns to ensure quality. And I appreciate that because we know, we are gaming something right now, right? We want to make a game of our work, but we want to make sure that people are doing quality work. And what we've found is, Jim and I have never built the same Kanban twice. And I'll show you mine. But like even for writing a book, our value stream is very different every single time we write one because we're always finding better ways to do our work. We're always finding either, missteps or a different step or reach out to this person over here. But when we weren't visualizing the process, we had no way of improving it. We had no way of seeing if what was essentially becoming done, we had no way of seeing if it was at the quality that we had wanted. Great question. Did that answer it to the extent that you needed, Ivana?
Yes, Yes, I like this one with the consensus of the team. I think it's a good solution, even in the family conditions. It's not done until I say it's done. It's a bit.
So I can show you pictures. So before I said to you, you know, we started hearing from moms and kids and schools and educators. And the next book that's coming out in the Personal Kanban series is called Kids Bond, because we have been hearing from so many educators and parents. And one of the ways, very, very astute, what you said is like, I think it was Covey, I think, who wrote about green and clean. When he talks about, you know, when you ask your child to go out and clean your backyard and they come back 20 minutes later, and to you, it looks absolutely no different than when you sent them out there, but to them, it looks amazing. It's because you haven't specified what is my definition of done. And so that's another really useful purpose for Personal Kanban, is that done column, you can now have conversation over what does done really look like. Because my done and your done might be completely different. Anybody's ever cleaned a house with a partner knows that one person has a definition of clean and the other person has a completely definition of clean. So now you could start normalizing your expectations, you know, about what does done actually look like. Okay. All right. So am I correct in saying, Alexander, we have half an hour left?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I was thinking of doing is just doing a quick, and Jim, if you're okay with this, just showing you what this would look like on a tool. And then we can jump into the lean coffee. You're all good with that? All right, so let me see how to share my screen. Share. All right. So are you able to just see my Kanban?
Yep.
All right. So this is what I'm using. I am in a tool called Kanban Zone right now. And Jim and I, even though we live about 20 minutes from each other, we still don't have the benefit of getting together every single day in a, you know, for a stand-up, but we do get in front of, you know, our respective boards. This is a high level board. Because this is in my home and because, you know, I control who I share it with, I do have personal items on here as well. And so one of the goals for me with my Kanban is to surface patterns. We do not make sense of discrete data. We make sense, remember before I talked about the story arc? We make sense of data in specific context. Okay, so this makes sense in my context because first of all, I have a visual language. I know immediately all of my red, I know that all of this is client work. I'm feeling pretty good knowing it's a Thursday, and just at this 30,000-foot view, I know that I only have one more task for my client. I am ahead of the game this week with that. I also know that I'm getting some balanced throughput. I'm looking at my done column, and I'm noticing I have a lot of different colors, and that shows me that I'm managing my life pretty okay this week. I have a lot of tickets in here. This makes me feel good. One of the questions we often get is, how long should I keep tickets in my done column? I like to tell people, when you see you're done, when you see completion, again, it literally feels good. How many days have you gone into work? You've had 2 tasks that you've had to do. You've worked all day. You're exhausted at the end of the day. And guess what? You haven't done those 2 tasks. So you beat yourself up and you feel like you've done nothing. I like keeping some tickets done in here so that it shows me that I have been successful. And as far as how big a ticket should be, one of the things that we've discovered is that when things are too big, it engages our amygdala, which is responsible for our fight or flight mechanism, and it shuts us down. And the last thing we want to do with knowledge workers is shut their brains down, because anything too big, our brain views it as risk. And so what our brain does is it optimizes for 2 things: to minimize risk and maximize reward. So when it is confronted with a risk, we want to eliminate the risk, or we want to avoid the risk. So we want to make sure that when we are building our cards, that they are small enough to gain action on every single day, such that it continues to motivate us. Because when we are pulling this ticket into done, not only does it feel good for me, you can see the little app reinforces that, But it also gives me the motivation to pull something else into doing as well. So my board, the way that I have it is, here's my priority filter over here to the left. And as Jim said, you don't have to build your board like this. It's just how I build mine. So this is basically my options column. And it's not really important for you to read anything. I mean, you certainly can, but what's on it, I try to give myself as much information at a glance so that I don't actually have to read deeply. So I know that these are options for me, and I can close these. This is why I really like this tool. And one of the things I noticed is that I was constantly bothering Jim, and he didn't share this with me. I just felt I was always annoying Jim when I had an idea or when I wanted to, just send him something. So now anything I want to I want to share with him, I just drop into this board. This workflow is just for my huddles, just things I want to talk about with Jim. So when we have our daily huddles, I actually have all the topics in here that I want to talk to him about, and I'll use this. This is my main workflow. I put my week's priorities, weekend's priorities, today doing pen and done. This is the other column that's really important and really useful. Jim Jim, you didn't go over this, I don't think, did you? The pen?
I noticed that I just noted that it was there.
Okay, good. So the pen, I love this. When you're working on something, say it's you're doing you need to make a dentist appointment. All right. And you have a ticket that says make dentist appointment, and you call the dentist and you leave them a message, but nobody's gotten back to you about a date. You don't want to keep that in doing, because essentially you've started working on that and you're waiting for somebody else. So you would pull that ticket into the pen so that it's not causing a bottleneck over here. All right. So whenever there's a dependency, whenever something is in waiting, I love adding this pen column. Another thing that I use for my personal Kanban is to create habits. So last year you would have seen, or 2 years ago, you would have seen rowing, 3 cards for rowing every day or every week on my board. Now they're no longer there. It's the same reason you don't have to put on your to-do list, brush teeth. You've already created the neural pathways that created a habit. And so for me this year, one of the habits that I wanted was I wanted to see if I could read 52 books. I'm getting close. And because I made a game of it, because every time I read a book, I put it in here. And now I really like seeing, the corpus of my work for the year. And so Personal Kanban has actually helped me with that as well. Another way it's helped me is I'm able to have different workflows for different times and different parts in my life. This is a workflow for just packing and flying and being on the road. And I have to be honest with you, the most important, though, let me pull this up. I don't know who does hosting or holidays, but I could not have gotten through the holidays without a Kanban. I am from a big New York Italian family. We do a very big Feast of the Seven Fishes, it's called, on Christmas Eve. That requires not just 7 dishes, but 7 fish on top of a ton of other things. And this requires a lot of crazy Italian women being in the kitchen. I could not get through this without having a Kanban. So all of this prior to Christmas was in my backlog. And when people would come, my cousins would come here, they were co-hosting with me. Nobody ever had to ask who's doing what. I knew if my cousin Gina was getting the caprese salad skewers on the table. We knew what order everything had to be done in. And a board like this likewise facilitates the conversations that need to happen. And I will close with this one quick story. A couple of years ago, we were hosting a big holiday dinner, and my partner was upset because the guests were late. Now, I had done a ton of appetizers, a ton of cocktails, everything was perfect. They walk in, he was so angry, he walked out of the kitchen with the turkey. No appetizers, no drinks, nobody was getting their coats taken from him, because in his mind, feeding guests was our definition of done. So having the board allowed us to have a conversation that showed that is not the definition of done. We have all of these tickets that have to move before the turkey has to move. But it likewise showed me that even in relationships, we have these disconnects. And so if you don't think I run my home with a Kanban, absolutely everything in my home runs with a Kanban. And what I really like about it is it shows me how much work he's doing, and I could appreciate it. When it was hidden, I didn't know all he was accomplishing. And likewise, he didn't know all I was accomplishing. So it's definitely helped us with our relationship as well. All right. So with that, I will stop sharing and I will put the, let's see, does everybody have the link to the personal, where is it? To the Lean Coffee Table? Let's see who's in the Lean Coffee Table. Nobody has the link to the Lean Coffee Table because nobody is in the Lean Coffee Table. So I'm going to put that in here. Any questions? Any topics related to what we talked about? Drop them in here. And if we do not get to them, I will try to get you the answers after the call. So.
I wanted to ask one question. Maybe you actually answered that question, but I'm not sure. I will ask the question again in that case. So I was wondering, is actually personal Kanban a precondition for a successful team Kanban?
Well, so again, personal distinguishes between manufacturing. We use personal Kanban with enterprises, with organizations, with the World Bank, with the United Nations, with Spotify, with Facebook. So it's just, it's tracking work of individual value to the individual person, but it's for teams. And one of the ways that you can track that is, what we don't suggest is that you immediately go to individual boards. Like, so we have a team board at Personal Kanban, but then we break those tasks down further on individual boards. But I'm able to see what the team is working on at any given time. So if there's one thing Jim Benson and I are lousy at, it's naming things. So personal was probably not the best thing to name it.
Well, it was, yeah. So the issue is that what we're not talking about is the Kanban method, and Kanban method is not necessarily what you should do with teams. But I'm just going to show you like a short deluge of really weird looking Kanbans. All of these are personal Kanbans, and all of these are used by teams. So when we showed the construction project, this is the other side of that wall. This is their Obeya, and this is their procurement Kanban back here. All right. So that's definitely being used by a team with a large group. This one over here, this is a Kanban at a fairly large restaurant outside of Boston. So these are the tasks that need to be done every day, and they're not assigned to any people. So people will take those tasks and they will move them through the day. So some of these tasks need to happen once during the day. Some need to happen several times during the day. But they move those tasks through the kind of the football pitch until they get to complete. There's also Kanbans down here for things that the management staff needs to do. So they call those coaches' plays. And what they found was that immediately upon putting this board up, most of this stuff that the bosses had to do, anyone could do if they had some time. And so one of the things that happens at every restaurant is you get a crunch period and then you get slack periods. And so now when things are slack, everybody comes back to this board and they just run as many of these tickets through as they can. And then they find that they're much calmer during the crunch because all of these things have been taken care of. So these things might be make sure that there's enough napkins in the bus stand, or that all of the salt shakers are filled up, or whatever that might be. Let's see. This is from a different restaurant, but is how they handled kind of that same thing, just a different visualization of that same type of work. They crossed things out when they were done. And what they were finding as they did that was that crossing things out meant that you wrote down a lot of notes. Because it's never as good as moving stuff along. Then here is yet another Kanban, which is one of the weekly ones, and this is absolutely horrible. It looks like AI generated it. It was taken so poorly. But this is another one of those boards that's trying to track where people are on specific days of the week. Here is a board over here where we have groups that are doing specific it's a marketing group that's writing proposals. And so they write the proposals go into review. They tend to go back and forth between these two things, and then they go off to be completed. So all of these things are used. Here's yet another one down here. All of these are different kinds of Kanbans that are personal Kanban that are used by teams, where the teams are more interested in the coordination with each other, the flow of work and their relationships, than they are in specific metrics and statistics. They're trying to track, are we actually working well as a group? And we have just tons of these. One of the other things that I just want to mention really quickly, just because I can, is this is from Facebook. So at Facebook, they make all of their own hardware, and the hardware is like they actually invent the hardware, manufacture the hardware, and then deploy it in the server farms. This is a huge server farm in Ireland. And when you open any of their boxes, it doesn't matter what kind, anything that you can touch with your fingers is this color of green. And they call them green touch points. And so when we were setting up their visualizations for how their work flowed, one of the first things that we did was we used that language. So their Kanban has different green touch points where they know that they can interact with the process, interact with the work without getting into trouble. So when you're visualizing the work, make sure that there's a language that the team owns that allows that work to be shared and understood.
Yeah, and well, thank you. But what I'm thinking right now, um, can you name at least, if you can't one, let's say the most important, what's the most important lesson? That's a question for you too, Tony. What's the most important lesson you actually learned by or teaching Kanban to others, let's say?
That every human being wants to be a good professional, and that having an understanding of work allows people to just go off and do that. It's not giving them permission, it's creating the system where they can do it. So we're not saying you have psychological safety. It's like building a system that actually provides that agency and psychological safety. Tony has a visual control for hers.
I do. I have the worst thing I ever heard from a client on a sticky note. And we were working for an organization in the middle of the United States. There wasn't a lot of opportunity in this area. And so this was a fairly large insurance company. And at the beginning of this week-long engagement, we asked people, what would you like to get out of this week, this personal Kanban week that we were going to be working with this team? And this woman stood up and she self-identified as a single mom of 3 teenagers. She had no formal education. She said, I have to make this job work. And the way that she stood, she was shaking. She was very uncomfortable. And she said, help me justify my existence to my boss. And I told you at the outset, I'm Italian, and with all the stereotypes that comes with. And Jim just looked at me. Jim just turned his body to see if I was going to fall apart. And I was able to not fall apart there. But I have told this story since, because this story killed me. Because at the end of that, we spoke with her leadership, and her leadership is like, oh, I had no idea. She's one of my charges. I had no idea she felt that way. She said she was one of my charges. She didn't know her name. This woman had been there for 19 years and she did not know her name. So for me, the most important lesson that I have taken from Personal Kanban is that our truest measure of organizational health is not in our metrics or our margins, but in whether or not we are creating spaces and tools for people who are working in an organization for decades who don't feel like they are becoming visible. Because when somebody spends 19 years of their life pouring everything that they have into a job only to feel that they're unseen, we haven't just failed the employee. We've failed at that fundamental human contract of work. And that's the thing I am most proud of with Personal Kanban, is that it is helping people not to feel that their efforts, their value is unseen.
There's so much that we've experienced, and so much depth in just how we work together as people, how we respect each other, how we like each other, how we get into fights, how we generate toxicity and anger and frustration, how well we communicate and how terribly we communicate, that it's really hard to do a 1 hour or talk about personal Kanban for us now, because there's just so many things that we want to say. Like literally there's just, I have in my visualizations here, like right now I'm looking at a visualization from Jimdo in Germany, where they use personal Kanban at the strategic level, at the programmatic level, and then at the team level, and then had those personal Kanbans all related to each other, so everybody knew when they needed to work with everybody else. And it'd be, I can't show you that because it's like overwhelm. It'd be its own talk. Just that one graphic would be its own talk. But we have a desire for life to be better, and we're all overwhelmed, and we don't have the mental capacity to actually invest our time into making life better.
And we're not just overwhelmed by our work. We're overwhelmed by what is happening in our homes, in our communities, in our cities, in our nations, on our globe, to our environment. This is, I mean, I'm sure every generation says it, but everything just feels really acute right now. Everything just feels really raw. So if we can give people easier ways that they can get through their 8, 10, whatever hours at work, then maybe we can hope that people will go home and be better partners and be better parents and be better community members and be more effective and less of a drain on the environment. What we're hoping to do with these systems is to create virtuous cycles such that people leave work feeling fulfilled, feeling seen, feeling excited to go in the next day.
I was inspired by your presentation, Tonya. You said that you're using Kanban board in your family life on daily basis, and in your personal life. But have you ever said to your client or to your, I don't know, friends, okay, let's leave Kanban for the moment on the standby, this is not working? So when are those moments and situations you're giving up Kanban?
Yes, absolutely. So Jim and I, people for years were like, oh, you're the Kanban people. We're like, no, we're not. We're the continuous improvement. We just want you to pay attention to your work. So we worked with a series of government agencies in Washington. And there was this one agency that had all this work to process. The work itself was a Kanban. They had boxes upon boxes. Like, you don't need to recreate every single piece of work on a Kanban. The visualization is enough. Do you remember that, Jim?
Yeah. So I was in Seattle, and they had all these things they needed to process, and just finishing a box of these forms was actually the Kanban itself. It was a literal physical Kanban. You knew when you were done when the boxes disappeared. They wanted to build a visualization for stuff that was already visual.
And we've also had people who have become psychotic with this. There was one woman who was taking her entire grocery list. Like, for me, shopping, groceries would be a ticket. For her, every single item on her grocery list had its own ticket that she moved over. She was processing tickets way quicker than she was creating tickets. So when that happens, when you're processing tickets way quicker, that's a good indication that you probably don't need the Kanban. And when it's already become a habit, Like I said, like my meditation is already a habit. My rowing is already a habit. But to get me into that habit, so currently on my board, I keep a standard work checklist every week on my board. I keep one for personal work and one for professional work. And right now, I am learning 2 languages at the same time. I could never do that if it wasn't on my Kanban. And so I have a checklist every day. I do 25 minutes every single day. And I'm starting to notice that I don't even pull those tickets anymore because I just do them as a matter of course. So a Kanban is really good for building habits, but once that becomes a habit, you don't need to do that. Not if it's really taking up your capacity, because arguably that habit is not going to be taking up that much cognitive capacity.
Great, thank you.
But I will share one really quick story, and this is what compelled us to really look into this for families and kids. One of our first engagements, we were working with a company in that built library software. And during one of our lunches, one of the managers called me over and said, hey, and this was probably about 14 years ago. So there really weren't a lot of Kanban apps out there yet. He said, my wife is pregnant with our 4th child and she homeschools them. She teaches them at home. She's like, and you know, she's got a lot on her plate. So he went in and he created a Kanban of all the different kids' work every single day. And he could go in the middle of the day and see who's progressing in math, who's having a hard time in their language studies, you know, who's collaborating with somebody else to see. And he leans into me, and this really choked me up. And he said, and so at any point in the day, I know what my wife is up to, and I know how her day is going, and it makes me be a better husband. And those are the kinds of stories that we have heard throughout our time with Kanban. We trained folks at the Gates Foundation and Microsoft. They went home, introduced it to their pregnant wife. Their pregnant wife, when they had their baby, then took it to Starbucks. It's always like working with it at home is the best gateway drug. And I suggest that, especially with the holidays coming up, put your planning on it for the holidays. Put your planning on it for gifts, right? For decorating, for if you have a project at home, if you're building something, if you're throwing an event. The best way to learn about Kanban is to start with a project that's small, that you want to engage with, where you have a small team, small willing team, and that's the best way to get started. And like tools so the tool that I was using was Kanban Zone. They have a free, I mean, you can work with it for, I don't know if it's weeks or months, and it's a free tool. So I always tell people, utilize the free, and I'll actually write it down here. See what you like working with. But truth be told, just starting, even just starting with sticky notes on a whiteboard first to map it out, to figure out what you would need to put in an online app. But right now I do everything in this app. My whole life is on this board.
It would be very interesting to try to taste, let's say like that, your practice related to Italian holidays. Even next week, because we have one of the biggest, let's say, celebrations. It's a religion event called Slava in Serbia. We have one of the biggest Slavas next week. My family is celebrating, and maybe I will try to put a preparation of that event on a Kanban board to see we'll be able to prepare Slava better using Kanban than without using it.
That's
Lava
awesome.
bomb.
What I will do is I will give you a link to the article that I wrote about it so you can see. And also if you have any struggle with it, reach out to me. I would love to help any of you. If you want to put together a board for your holidays, ping me. I'll give you a hand. I'd love to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Also, I should say, and Alexander, we will give this to you. We have these open lean coffees that we talk about this kind of stuff. At Modus, we do a lot about the psychology and the sociology behind work. We're not your typical software engineering. We talk about Jim's punk rock background and how his do-it-yourself culture informs so much of what we do. We talk about music. Our reading lists are seldom business books. You know, we draw a lot from cross-disciplinary concepts. So we will make sure that you have a link. We invite all of you to join us anytime you want, but I mean it. If any of you need help putting together your holiday Kanbans, text me. I'll be around for the holidays. I'm more than happy to do so.
Yeah, Jim wrote Slavaban in
That's it.
the chat. Yeah, that should be one of the greatest names ever invented. Yeah, I'm never thinking about Kanban in that way, but yeah, that's the original one. We should put a registered trademark on that. Yeah,
That's right,
definitely.
because the first control every idea.
Yeah, that's right.
I
Guys,
just put a link. I just put a link to
yeah,
the article in the
that's what I
chat
wanted to
about the
ask. Yeah.
holiday board.
Yeah.
Right.
Guys, are there any questions from the other participants? Yeah. Because we are very close to the end. And Sarka, Alexei, maybe somebody wants to ask any question. Take your chance right now, if you would like, of course.
Take your chance.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this inspiring session.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes. And no specific questions, just I wrote in this tool a question of impact on our privacy or the wide usage of Kanban. What is the in that way? Thank you.
Jim?
Oh, okay. You were moving, so I thought
I'm
you were
looking
about
for
to
because
say
I'm
something.
looking for the board.
So, all right.
Like,
So,
yeah.
well, what I would say to that is that the we've seen people be pretty ridiculous
Creative.
sometimes.
And creative.
So one of the worst was we were working with a upper management person, and on their board they had a ticket that literally said fire and then a person's name.
Yeah. Don't do that.
Don't do that. But by and large, like when Tony showed you her board, she had figured out what were the things that she could put on the board that are shareable with other people. So one of the trade-offs that we've gone through, because we try and show people the stuff that we're actually doing. And so when we're doing things that include marketing of specific companies or work that we're doing with specific clients where those tickets might be sensitive information for the client, we will either have to put that in a board that other people can't see, or we will have to write the ticket so that the ticket itself is is vague, so that other people could see it and not figure out what was going on, but we could get enough information to act. So in the board that I showed from Turner, from Amanda and Savannah. Oh, I didn't show that in this one. Okay. I was in the talk earlier this morning. So earlier this morning, I showed a different board from Turner, and I actually had Greeked out a lot of the stuff that was in that board because it was corporate, corporately sensitive. So just watch for it. But what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't use fears like that to not do the Kanban. We have had companies where there have been upper management and they've said, we can't do a Kanban because we can't let anybody see what's going on, not even ourselves. And you're just like, well, good luck with that, dude.
But that is also indicative of a bigger problem. That's also indicative of a larger cultural issue on the team,
Yeah.
right? I mean, do you
It's
have
incredible lack of trust.
do you have psychological safety on your team as it exists? Because if you don't have the ability for people to show their vulnerability, like I don't know something or I'm stuck, because so I spent 20 years in Washington, D.C., and I was working with top 4 consulting firm, and they were like, we can't show people we are stuck. I'm like, wow. So what are you going to do? So you know what they're going to do, Vani? They're going to pull a ticket into done, whether it's done or not. There's your quality issue. Because fear is causing the quality issue, no other reason. So yes, we have seen that. We're seeing it a lot less because now people are so much more, for better or for worse, everybody's sharing everything. But there
Mhm.
are ways of putting things on your ticket such that you and your team will have your own, I like to call it a folksonomy. So it's your own taxonomy, your own language. It's like there's a lot of tickets. People will look at Jim's on my board and nobody will know what it means because it's a language Jim and I speak.
Great.
Thank you very much. Great answer.
Thank you.
All right.
If that's all, when we speak
Yeah.
about questions, I suggest that we could finish this night
Mhm.
session because I think people are waiting for a Friday and a weekend that is going ahead
Yes.
of us, and the
Excellent.
same is for you guys. But it is a morning, I think, in Seattle right now. So
It
yeah,
is.
you're lucky. It's a day,
Yep.
and we are going to sleep here.
Yes.
So yes.
Right.
Okay, Tony and Jim. Thank you so much for tonight's
You bet.
session, and thank you for your time. On behalf of Agile Humans, I want to say that we really do appreciate what are you doing. We deeply respect all your work. I truly hope that we will have opportunity to see alive next year. We spoke
Yep.
about
Yes.
that. And I can't wait that to happen, to meet you in person, let's
Us
say,
as well.
across the ocean and see a little bit Europe. I think it's a good change for you.
Yes.
What should I say? Thank you one more time, guys. Thank you very much for participating tonight's
Appreciate your
session.
time, everybody, and your interest. Thank you.
I wish you to spend a successful day, to finish this week successfully, and to have a great rest during the weekend. And that would be all. So
Yep.
that would be all for tonight, folks.
And
Have
good
a nice day.
Slava.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
everyone. Appreciate
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I heard that for Slava. Thank you.
you.
I will have you in my mind on that day. Don't worry. And maybe I will send you a photo to
I would
see.
love to see that.
Even
Tony,
better.
I will send you a
Yes.
photo for sure. Be sure that you will see my table, how it looks at the end.
I would love
Good
to.
deal.
Yeah.
I would love to.
All right.
Yeah.
Have
Be
a
well,
good night,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good
Thank you.
night, everybody.
Bye.
See you next time.
Thank you.